Welcome to Second Opinion. I'm Rosemarie, and if you've ever wanted a second opinion on some of the trending topics in health and wellness, you are in the right place. Each episode, I sit down with experts, innovators, and even a few disruptors to bring you fresh perspectives on the issues that could change your life, from age rejuvenation and brain health to the weight loss drug revolution and how to reinvent your career. Together, we'll dig into the latest research, question what's hype and what's real, and give you the insight you need to make your own choices about health and wellness. So, if you're ready for a second opinion that's engaging, enlightening, and maybe even a little unexpected, let's get started. Today, I'm talking with Emily Power-Smith, a sexologist, therapist, and educator with a mission to make it safe and normal for all people to talk about sexuality. Emily has a master's degree in sexology and a background in art psychotherapy, with years of experience helping people navigate their sexual well-being with a science-based, non-judgmental, and sex-positive approach. Emily is a professional member of the World Association of Sexual Health, the College of Sexual and Relationship Therapists, and the Irish Association of Creative Art Therapists. She believes in meeting people where they are and helping them explore their sexuality in a way that aligns with their values, needs, and desires, free from shame or social and societal judgment. Emily, thank you so much for being here today. I'm really, really excited.
Thank you so much. It's such a pleasure to speak with you and to be invited onto your wonderful podcast.
Thank you. And full disclosure, Cleona Cosgrove, or Dr. Carey, who was on last week, introduced me to Emily. So I'm really excited for the personal connect. Yeah. And because once I was approached and pitched the topic, I thought, wow, this is something I didn't even think about for our listeners. But I know firsthand, just from my peers, my colleagues, that it's definitely worth talking about. So you have such an amazing background of and potpourri of interest professionally and personally. Why sexology?
Well, I was working away as an art psychotherapist in Ireland, and I qualified and became accredited in 2004 with that. And I was working away in my private practice and working for the government in the health department and the Department of Education, and also attending therapy myself, of course. And I realized that when I wanted to bring up anything sexual for myself in my own therapy, I was very masterfully guided away from the topic. And I realized as clients brought that topic to me, I was really uncomfortable staying with the topic of sexuality with my clients. And it was simply because I hadn't, in all my training, had very much training at all on the sexual part of people's lives. So as with most people without training, my fear was that a Pandora's box would be opened and I wouldn't have the skills to look after people properly in their damage, because I imagined that's what we'd be talking about, was difficulty, trauma, damage, and I didn't feel trained. I asked other therapists in other in other modalities, how did they work with this in Ireland? And across the board, the answer was, I can't tell you how to work with sex, but I can tell you how to veer your clients away from the topic. And I was thinking, this just isn't good enough. I didn't blame anyone, because if the training isn't there, in a way, it is the thing to not go there with your client. We had a big financial downturn in around 2008, and the government work started to dry up because it was only a bit of old art, and sure, anyone can do that. So my funding started to go. And I decided at that point that it was time to upskill. And so I started Googling sex therapy and psychosexual therapy, and the word sexology came up. First time I'd ever heard of it, Googled it, and discovered that it's the scientific study of human sexuality. It's research-based, which I really liked. And so then, being me, my way of doing things, I was like, is there such a thing as a world award-winning course? And there is. And so I signed myself up for that course, which was in Western Australia, and packed up my life. And at the start of 2009, I joined the master's program there in Curtin University in Perth in Western Australia. It gets awarded every year, every couple of years, so it's not there all the time, that award, but it was there the year before I entered the course. So that's how I got to it. I discovered I could do a general master's in clinical sexology, and then you can specialize from that, kind of like a general master's in maybe psychology, and then you'd specialize.
Mm-hmm.
This was around sexuality, similar thing. And so because I was already a trained and somewhat experienced therapist, it seemed like a no-brainer to go into psychosexual therapy.
Wow. It's almost like the what is it? The student becomes the teacher, right? So you were researching for yourself and now you are guiding other people. And it's so interesting that we get shied away from talking about it, right? And it even starts off when we are very young age. But and how, as I did more research and as our conversation moves along, how much sexuality and sexual health impacts our overall health. So it's no coincidence that why, even if we go to talk about it, it's like, ooh, like depending on who it's with, it's like, I don't know, how, you kind of shy away from it. So that's pretty interesting
And I think it
that
has a
was your
lot to do with
experience.
people being afraid that they won't do a good enough job, certainly in the
Yeah.
professional realm. So I would train a lot of professionals here in Ireland around how to speak in a sex positive manner to their clients or patients, whatever their field. And usually that's what it is. People are just afraid of doing harm.
Okay.
And that makes sense. So I think it often comes from a good place. Professionals
Of course.
who veer us away from the topic. Of course, there's all sorts of people who do that, but generally, I think it comes from a place of care. But then
Okay.
also, certainly in Ireland, and I know pockets of the States are the same, and it's the same around the world. Certainly in Ireland, there isn't a general high standard of sexuality education anyway in schools. So doctors, physios, occupational therapists, nurses, whoever, are brought up in the same system as their patients. And they're not given an awful lot of understanding. There's a lot of sexual shame still in Ireland. Is in a lot of countries, let's face it. It's
Yeah.
probably the norm globally, more so than otherwise. And so just because you train as a doctor doesn't mean you shed your shame or your own hang-ups about sexuality, which is going to make it a difficult topic for you to talk about or to listen about or to provide space for, because you're going to have all your own blocks and values and misinformation going on there as well. So it's layered, it's complicated.
Yeah. With the whole layering aspect, I feel like one thing leads to a next, especially in careers. We were just talking about the organic kind of unfolding of things. How does art, your work in psychotherapy and art, how does that influence your role as a sexologist?
Well, I guess the training, there was a lot of psychotherapeutic training and psychological training in that. It was a 4-year training. So I had a lot of time to do a lot of my own work on myself, which impacts me massively now. But also, I guess with art therapy, the way I chose to practice, it was quite a somatic experience. I used the body a lot. And I've always been very interested in the role of the body in therapy, in verbal therapies. Now, art therapy isn't a verbal therapy necessarily. It doesn't have to be at all. And that's one of the beauties of it. But I think it was a foundation and a basis upon which I could build my psychosexual work. So how does your body feel? Where do you store that emotion? Where do you store that worry or that physical pain? What is it? And what happens when you use your body to help that pain or that congestion of emotion? I think of it now when a person says to me, "Oh, I've got this, I'm thinking about this really difficult situation, and where is it in the body? Oh, maybe it's in my shoulder, and I'm really feeling it there." And I will work with breath and to help the person to invite the whole of the body to take on that congested pain. And if we can use our breath to spread that pain through the whole body, there's plenty to manage that pain. It's when it gets congested in one area that it causes more problems. Now, I'm not talking about an injury. I'm talking about emotional pain stored in the body. I'm not trying to say that will work for a shoulder injury, but I'm talking about how our energy and our emotions can really get stuck in certain parts of our body and stop the flow of energy that's needed for really great sexual pleasure and pleasure in general. So it's a very important part of my work, and it would have stemmed from my experience as an art therapist using the body in that way.
Well, since you talk about the body, which a lot of people, sexuality, also, though, you did touch on the emotional aspect of things. Could you talk a little bit about the difference between, say, sexuality and sensuality, and why these two topics, why talk about these today? The importance of bringing up because I don't know if necessarily people think about those things. Like maybe they think they're interchangeable, but I feel like they're not, but maybe you could shed some light on that.
Yeah, I would agree with you. I think they overlap. If it was a Venn diagram, there'd be a lovely bit in the middle where they can dance together. But I think generally sexuality, well, the term sexuality is a very broad term. Now I'm going to geek out and use the literal meaning, but
go for it.
Societal meaning necessarily. But so for me, sexuality covers our behaviors, our identities, our values, our history, our loves, our distastes, all those, covers everything. Sex is what we're born with. It's how we know what physical gender we are. So I would include, so that's, when you're using that sort of terminology. Sensuality then is, if you think about it, it's using the senses. So it might be sexual, but it might be a piece of music. It might be have you ever walked into a place and seen a sofa and it's like, I just want to sit on that, velvet sofa that it's going to envelop me and I'm going to tuck in there and I'm going to get myself this is me now, I'm not saying this is everyone, a chocolate brownie, and I'm going to get myself a gorgeous coffee and all my senses are buzzing. That's a sensual act. Now, I get confused, mind you, between sensual and sensuous. That might be a sensuous act. Sensual, in the realms of what I do, is often more about using the senses to explore and to feel pleasure with yourself or with another person or persons. That involves touch, taste, sound, smell. What's the other one? Touch, taste, sound, smell. Touch, taste, sound.
Hearing,
Yeah.
Hearing, touch it, yeah.
So
Taste.
those are so you can have a sensual act, which might be about how you touch someone. It might be a stroke. It might be a massage. It might be a caress. It might be sexual. It might just be affectionate. It might be loving. It can be sexual, but it doesn't have to be. And I think for a lot of people in midlife, sensual is actually a really more useful place to begin if you've kind of lost that connection with your sexuality. Don't jump in the deep end. Start by walking around the pool and seeing where and if you want to get in and where the steps are and if they're shallow enough for you. And if that's, I'm all about taking your time and finding your unique gateway back into your sexual life and pleasure. And I think starting with sensuality is a lovely way to do that.
Oh, I'm glad I brought that up.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I'm now gonna geek out because I feel like numbers tell a story, right? In science and things like that. So when we look at the numbers, we can tell a lot, whether it's a lab result, a cohort, so what. So I'm going to read off a bunch of numbers and then ask your thoughts on it. So 80% of women between the ages of 20 to 40 years old are sexually active. About 50% of midlife women are sexually active. So it's about half. Now, of that 50%, about 70% of women have the desire to have sex. They feel enjoyment around sex and they feel satisfied with sex. So I feel like this is important, especially when you talked about just getting yourself back in and maybe what changes between those ages of, from 20 to 40 to say midlife, like what's affecting those numbers. And then with that, midlife women who are, of course, cohabitating or in partnership have approximately 8 times higher the odds of being sexually active. So we go from 80% when you're 20 to 40 years old, we drop to 50, and then a pretty high amount of that 50% are not feeling satisfied or desire, or I think, overall satisfied. So when you as the expert listen to those numbers, what does that data say about how women are experiencing their sexual desires in midlife versus their younger years?
Okay, well, first thing, can I really geek out?
Yes, go for it.
What does sex mean in that study? Is it partnered, or is it sex? Is it single sex or partnered sex for a start?
Partnered sex.
And is it penetrative
Yes.
sex, or does it include oral and manual and toy sex?
All aspects of sex.
You know that, or
Actually, hold on. These are great questions. Let me look down.
I'm sorry to be, but it is important because quite often
I agree.
studies are limited by the questions that are asked, and the people who ask them are limited by their personal experience and values. So a straight person, when they talk about sex, are usually talking about penis and vagina sex, penetrative. But obviously lesbians are not going to be talking about that, and they're still having sex. So,
okay.
It's just interesting. We don't have to get too, let's go with what what we think it is, which is partnered penetrative sex.
Yeah. And also thank you for bringing up all this, because I want you to bring this into the conversation. Yeah. So feel free to do that.
Because we want to make sure we're representing and including as many people as we can in these conversations. So a lot of the studies don't, because it depends who's funding them. It's why there's 4 times the amount of studies done on male sexual pleasure than there are done on female sexual problems and pain. That's because of who funds the research. That's just the reality. So absolutely. We're still figuring out what endometriosis does to a woman's sexuality, whereas we've got to the point where we have Viagra being sold over the counter now. You don't even need a prescription here in Ireland for it. It may be the same in America. This kind of disparity is just everywhere. So it's very rife in research, particularly sexuality research as well, which is still a very new field. So, okay. But we can go with, what do you want?
Well, I was going to say, can you touch on both? We'll go with partner.
I love touching on everybody.
Listen, that's why we call it second opinion, because we've got lots of them. And then I want my goal of bringing people like you is to let's expand this conversation where maybe I saw one focus because I looked at one set of data and you're coming in with the other set. So by all means.
Yeah. So a lot of women who are asked about sex will also give the answer based on what they think sex is. So it's very common so who knows? We don't know who the cohort was. Were they cohabitating only with opposite sex? Were the same sex? Were there queer people? We don't know. So let's just go on what the research says, which is there's a drop off after 20 to 40. There's a drop off in sexual activity, and within that 50% who are still active, there's 70%. You said who are happy with unsatisfied.
That are unhappy. There's out of that 50%. 70% of those are unhappy. They're not satisfied.
Sorry, I misheard you. Is it the other way around? So yeah, that makes much more sense. Okay. And why is that? Well, really common reasons. People who are in long-term relationships often struggle to keep their sex lives enjoyable and satisfying. It's really interesting that the research shows for heterosexual couples, actually, that quite often women get more bored with the same type of sex than their male partners, even though we're taught it's the other way around.
Yeah, interesting.
So they might be doing stuff that they might have an orgasm if they're, lucky. They might be able to feel connected to their person and they might get value from that. But if you ask them if the sex does it for them, it's more what it means to them that is useful and that they like, as opposed to the actual acts, which can be repetitive for them. And it's not to say that they're a victim of a male partner being repetitive. The female often wants to keep doing what they're doing because they know it works to a degree, and that's good enough. So we don't have to, doesn't have to be any blame here, but that's part of it. So then there's the long-term relationship thing is tricky. So what happens to women in long-term relationships, even though we're all living modern lives, our biology isn't modern. Our biology still belongs to a while ago, right? So we're still built to, spend the early parts of our lives up to, 35, 40 procreating or looking to do that. So we have higher sex drives, and then everything starts to wane. Our sex hormones start to go down. Our egg health starts to go down. And we have this biological thing going on that tells us, right, you're in a long-term relationship. That means you've had your babies early, because that's what we're programmed to do. Now it's time to nest, make a safe home, not focus on sex. You're focusing on keeping your children safe, rearing them, and that's more the focus. So energy changes. So what happens is, and I meet this a lot in my work, loving couples, and they get on well, but their sex life isn't where they want it to be. And you get talking to her and she's like, he's attractive. I really like him. But when it comes to sex, I really would prefer to get my chores done, or I'd prefer to do that email, or I'd prefer to then have sex, even though I enjoy sex. What's that about? Is my relationship broken? Is there something wrong with me? And the answer is no. That's actually the way it is for a lot of women in long-term relationships, and actually even younger women in long-term relationships. So you can have everything, all the boxes ticked, and your partner can, however they approach you for some sort of sexual interaction. And I do this for a living. I'm very happily married. I have a great sex life, and I still have to go, laundry or sex? Which would I mean, and there's nothing wrong. It's just how we're programmed. If everything else is good, that is, because there could be something wrong, but I'm talking about where there isn't anything wrong. And then the third bit where we have to talk about is hormone health, right? So from 40, even younger for some people, and if they've had hysterectomies, even younger, of course, it's menopause. It's the start of perimenopause for a lot of people, and then their hormones are going to peak and trough, and they're going to have times where they have no libido whatsoever, times where they have some libido. If people get help with HRT, that can be a help. Nothing is a cure. Nothing is a full solution. It can be for some lucky people, but generally we're all trying to muddle through with symptoms that make us feel unsexy, that make us feel exhausted, moody. We don't like ourselves. We don't like our partners. We don't like our kids. We don't like our dogs. We don't know why. And then the next minute we love them again. It's hard to navigate a sex life when you're living with that, and that's your daily reality. So there's a lot there that women have to live with, and often their male partners, if they're a similar age, are going through a version of andropause is one way of looking, one name for it, but certainly a hormone dip as well. So they may not be getting the same feedback from their partners of interest. They may not be feeling attractive. They may not be feeling interesting. There's all sorts of layers to it, but those are the main reasons I would know of as to why there would be a drop-off. A lot of women don't know about the effects of menopause on their sex lives, so they continue to have unsatisfactory sex without knowing that there's stuff they could do, just thinking, this is my lot, this is what it has, the way it has to be. So I would say there's a number of those women in that study who are in that category, who maybe don't know what could happen, can't have the conversations, wouldn't know what to say anyway. It all just used to work. Now it doesn't. And I've no education about it. So I'll just keep quiet, put up with it, do it as little as I can get away with, and hope for the best. There's a lot of people in that category.
Okay. Thank you for that. And thank you for bringing men into the conversation, because I did initially set out this was going to be female focused, but we don't live in a silo or another, we all have different types of partners, however, whatever your preference. And I found this interesting. And then I hope I'm going to stop with some of the numbers, but when these problems arise, so about 15% of midlife women who do experience sexual problems, sexual discomfort, then that does cause significant personal distress. So outside of their sex, out of, say, their sex lives.
Mhm.
And then what I do want to bring the men and the males into this conversation is, while the sexual frustration can present differently. So maybe you can talk about like side effects, like any, any way, like, how does this manifest differently in men and women? Say
Yeah.
if these problems show up.
Yeah, it's really, really interesting because they overlap in some areas. So we're
Exactly.
talking about a drop in sex hormones mainly. So the main hormone for men is testosterone, and they get it. I mean, they start losing their testosterone from early 20s. It gradually subsides. And there's a lot that can happen. Now, we have to be so careful of generalizing, right? Because individuals and
Right.
unique experiences matter and they happen a lot. And so, but generally, she says, then generalizing, there's this drop.
Trying to fit a lot in an hour.
No. But there are ways that can help. So sometimes if a man stays really fit and eats well and doesn't smoke and drink a huge amount or do drugs a huge amount and their stress levels are reasonable. I mean, how many of those men do we actually know? And the reality of life is so much harder than that for most of us. They are more inclined to hold on to their testosterone a little bit better. We know that intensive interval training and weights are the two best thing for exercise-wise for men and women to build up their testosterone naturally from a movement point of view. Running is not your friend. Cycling, really not great for your testicles. So it is about those two types. And there's foods and there's different things you can look out for and that will help, lots of oily things. And there's all sorts of things you can do. But you are going to have a depletion of these sex hormones, beyond which, for most people, natural approaches may not quite do it. So when a man's testosterone lowers, so some of the signs of it are a tummy. So the weight will go on the tummy. Tummy fat, and you've probably done this with people who know much more about it than me, but tummy fat produces estrogen. Estrogen kills testosterone. So we also have estrogen mimickers in our water, in our food chains now from plastics. So men are generally getting a lot more estrogens or estrogen mimickers in their environment and in their foods and drinks anyway. And then this can happen. So men have a bit more to contend with than they used to without even having any, just from living, just from breathing and drinking water. So there's that. Put that aside now for a minute. So tummies, loss of energy, loss of libido is an obvious one from my perspective. Erections aren't as good. Moodiness, grumpiness, a lack of mojo generally, a lack of love of life, wanting to just be on the sofa watching TV and not really talking to people. All of these things go with low testosterone. They're the general sort of symptoms. Now, you can have healthy men who have low testosterone who don't fit any of that, but we're talking about these dangerous generalizations. They're the ones. So a lot of men, and we don't know yet, a man's erection and his libido is a very big part of his identity as a human being. So it's interesting. Does the lowered libido and lack of reliable erections cause all the moodiness and the lack of joie de vivre? It looks like it does a bit, but it also looks like testosterone creates that joie de vivre. So we know for women who have testosterone as part of their HRT, often it's their mood, their energy, and their concentration that improves. But it is also our sex hormone as well. We're taught that estrogen is our sex hormone. It certainly is, but so is testosterone. And we need testosterone, and ours goes as well. So for women, it's all those things I named for men. Tummy fat, again, big problem. And then we get all the mood swings, the hot flashes. We get poor sleep, poor concentration, poor memory. I'm describing myself right now. get baggy. Our exercise doesn't work the way it used to. Our diets don't keep us trim the way they used to. We also then, on a sexual level, we can get very dry vaginas and dry vulvas. So just to clarify for people, the vulva is the face, the vagina is the mouth. So the vulva is everything on the outside between your legs, and the vagina is the birth canal. Just because a lot of people interchange or misuse those words. So vulva, geek again, I'm going to use the right terminology. So the vagina can get very dry, which means painful sex, because estrogen causes lubrication and we lose our estrogen. So once you have painful sex, why would you want it? It's crazy. Why would you want something that hurts or that isn't pleasant? But we also, and this is less spoken about, we get dry vulvas. So the clitoris can shrink. The skin around the glands of the clitoris can become oversensitive. And we can also get symptoms that are very like UTIs, urinary tract infections, that aren't there, they are, but they're brought on from dryness of the vagina. So when you get your vagina back into good health, UTIs can drop away again. And it's simply because with no moisture, this is how bad it can get. When there's no moisture in the vagina and there's any friction, you can get, they're almost like tiny little paper cuts on the inside of your vagina. So that's so easy for bacteria to get in there and cause issues. And into the urethra, same thing, the pee hole. So all of this can be helped massively with topical estrogen and with pessaries and with different things, that you don't have to suffer with that. But it is very, very common. And you also get a week, you can often start peeing in your pants. That's a very, very common thing as well. So that's, again, lack of estrogen. When you get estrogen back into the body, it plumps up all the muscles around the bladder and around the urethra. So a lot of women find that those symptoms can go as well. If you don't get it treated, it's hard to feel sexy with soggy pants, right?
Yeah, well, yeah, I would think so.
I can tell you from personal experience.
I laugh, but even going to the gym, we all experience all different things, and that's just a part of aging. Even though we're ageless,
even if you've enjoyed spontaneous sex and you start to have to wear pads because you're bleeding all over the place at different times that you can't control due to perimenopause, because that can happen, or you're peeing in your pants. Again, it just knocks something that might have been a go-to for you, something reliable where you could, there's my person we're going to have a little interaction. And that can be dropped away as well because you just don't feel confident anymore. So there's a lot of layers to it, a lot of ways that it can affect you.
Okay. And so with that, it just sounds like the physical aspects are affecting the emotional, and emotional affecting the physical, whether it's just your body, outside circumstances that we're just dealing with, whether in partnership or life. So I just kind of wanted to summarize that before I moved on. So that's what I'm trying to get from what you've been saying up until this point.
And something you've said that I wanted to really agree with and come back to just briefly, because I think it's a part of this, is that how we are sexually impacts the rest of our lives, and how the rest of our lives impacts us sexually. So the thought of compartmentalizing our sex lives and going, everything else is fine, my sex life is not, or vice versa, it doesn't work that way. How you do life is how you do sex generally. And again, we have to allow for the outliers for that. If you're an anxious person, don't expect to have relaxed sex.
Oh, well, that makes sense, because how you do one thing is how you do everything.
Yeah, exactly. If you're really, really busy and women are trained to have 9 things on the go in their minds at once, then you're supposed to take your clothes off, feel vulnerable, worry about how your body looks, and not have 9 things on your mind. Of course we do. That's just the way the way it goes. There's nothing wrong with us. We just have to practice how to recover and come back to the body and the sensation.
Okay, so that's a perfect segue into where I want to start getting into how we can start working on those mindsets. So a lot of women say that they don't have time. I think a lot of people in general, women and men, they don't have time for sex or intimacy. But what is really going on? And I know in private conversation between you and I, you talked about utilizing sex as a port in the storm. So if we could combine that question,
Yeah.
not having time, but using it, I don't want to say as a tool, because that doesn't really sound so sexy, no pun intended, but it could be a portal into something better instead of more or less like a chore.
Yeah, I think that's really, really important. So, when we start to be sexual, quite often we have less things on our plates. It's not always, but quite often. We don't have kids. We don't necessarily care about our jobs as much. It's different for everybody, but you get your day done and you've still got energy and you've still got time, and sex happens and it's fabulous and you can give it the time it needs. And, without a lot of sexual education, usually the sex that heterosexual people usually will engage in is penis and vagina sex, and they do all sorts of things, but that's usually the main course. I think of it as the starter, which is a little bit of foreplay. Main course is penis and vagina, and if you're lucky, you might get a cuddle for pudding. That's kind of how I think traditionally we're taught about it. So as we get older, busier, more stressed, might have children and older relatives that we're looking after, a job and a house to contribute to, and all sorts of, we have a lot going on. If we wait till all our things are done before sex gets its place, it usually gets knocked off the end of the list because we're just too bloody tired. And that's okay. That makes sense. We don't have to, again, all we need to do is evaluate our priorities. How important do we want sex to be? And then see if we can bump it up the list. And actually, it's an interesting one. If we want to exercise regularly and rely on being fit, we calendar it, don't we? We put it in our diary and we know and we plan and we have it worked out. We do that for socializing. We do it for our work or for any research we're doing around our work. And yet, when it comes to sex, we just expect it to have a place in our already completely packed agendas. So first thing is we need to plan for it. The next bit is, if we wait till everything is good before we have sex, so we're waiting for those calm seas, who has that? Who has calm seas for more than like 5 minutes these days? So again, it gets relegated. So again, my thing is, what about finding a sexual connection that feels like a port in the storm rather than waiting for the calm seas? Okay, so if you're open to that idea, what kind of sexual connection would feel soothing, relaxing, validating, connecting, those sorts of things? And it may not be your 3-course meal. It may not be a little bit of foreplay, penis and vagina, and maybe a cuddle for pudding if you're lucky. That may not fit for what you need. So how do you broaden out your menu so that sexual activity becomes more like a table of tapas rather than a 3-course meal? So do you get it? So you can have your favorite tapa. I go to my favorite place. Can I have my favorite tapa? It's not on the menu tonight, my lady. Okay, well, I'm not going to leave hungry. I'll have my second favorite, or I'll try something new. And I come away with a new experience, or at least well fed, and I can still hold on to my favorite, but I don't have to have it every time I go to that restaurant. It's similar. So can we give ourselves permission to not always go to the penis and vagina if that's too exhausting? If that means taking an hour when we've got 10 minutes, then we're not going to do anything.
Right.
You get me? So yeah. Again, if we can find something that helps us to look into our person's eyes and feel seen and feel attractive and interesting and feel connected to them, that's what we do. That might be, I remember this beautiful story of this couple, and she was terminally ill with cancer, and he was talking about their sex life. They were talking about their sex life, and they had always had a really beautiful sex life that fed both of them. And they talked about having sex in this last stage of her life. And the interviewer was like, what? How? What? And he said, we do it through hand touch. Because for us, sex is about connection and loving each other and being loved. So we just found an act that gives us that sensation, gives us that meaning and that feeling. And to them, they were making love. But that was what was available to them. It's so beautiful. How clever.
Wow.
How clever. So
thank you for sharing that.
So it's this idea, it's very moving, isn't it? It's this idea that we're only given one model for what sex should look like. And by the way, that's based on a young heterosexual male, by the way. And if we don't fit that model, we don't get anything. And I think it's a lot more useful to find our tapas. And one of them might be a head massage. One of them might be just cuddling. One of them might be naked cuddling. One of them might be 3 minutes of a passionate kiss. And that's all that's going to happen today. But it's meaningful to the people involved. It could be penis in vagina. It could be penis in anus. It could be nothing to do with penis. It could be nothing to do with genitals. It's whatever helps you to feel what it is that you need to feel when life is really hard. Because sex, in whatever way you want to see it or experience it, can be such an amazing shield from these terrible storms, as opposed to something we only do as a chore when everything else is done.
That was really beautiful. So I'm thinking about, boy, if we can all find a partner like that, boy, we would have we'd have a lot more sex. Anyway.
Well, exactly. But we become these partners. We're not those partners either. It's a journey. It takes work. This idea that sex, by the way, in our midlife and onwards, sex is a choice. It isn't what we're biologically built to keep doing necessarily. So the idea of sex just working and being easy and fabulous, and that rarely exists. And ask any sexologist, any psychosexual therapist, and they will tell you it's a choice. We want to have sex into later years. So it takes effort, it takes planning, and it takes, a certain amount of support of our bodies and of our emotional states and of our relationships to get to what works for us.
Okay, thank you. So I'm going to move on to say if we don't have a partner, because that was a beautiful explanation in partnership.
Yeah.
So for women, say, who are divorced, midlife, widowed, divorced women, single women, how can that group, single people, men and women, navigate their sexual, say, wellness? I've heard a lot of terms thrown out as I was researching.
Yeah.
Any thought with confidence, whether it's working on their sexual wellness and also navigating sometimes those fears of being alone? I know it's like a two-part question.
So navigating the fears of being alone, let's take that first. That is not something to be doing while you're being sexual, because it will just not be the right place for it. So that's something to do, and probably in therapy, if that is something that you have a fear of and something that you worry about. And you don't have to live with that. That is about confidence, believing in yourself, believing in the world, believing in life, believing that there may be somebody still available to you at some point. And that's something that if you're stuck in the fear, you can get help with and you can move through that. The sexual part, I love your question, because actually the best partner sex starts with unpartnered sex, starts with sex on our own. What's the term I'm trying to think of? Partnered sex, individual sex, single sex, that's it. So the best sex, particularly for women, stems from masturbation. Vulvas are tricky. There's a lot going on in a vulva. There's a lot to learn about. There's a lot to understand. And to decide that a partner is going to, particularly a male partner who doesn't have a vulva, that they're just going to know how to use our vulva for our pleasure better than we will, that belongs back in the dark ages of patriarchy. Men know less about vulvas than women do, and that's the way it should be. Like we know less about penises than men do. That's the way that goes. We have to learn from each other. So there's that. So I'm a great fan of I have 4 golden rules, and this is for being sexual with a partner. But the first one is masturbate. Well, the first one's actually educate. What does it mean to masturbate? How do you do it? And what's my vulva mean? And where are all the bits? That's educate. So that needs to happen. Then the next bit is masturbate. And I think that all women who masturbate and enjoy it tend to have a higher self-esteem, tend to enjoy life single or partnered more, tend to be closer to the simmer, and then they have all the benefits of orgasm if they masturbate to orgasm, of a mood enhancer, more confidence, less pain. Orgasmic energy is a painkiller. It's fascinating. It's not going to cure serious pain, but it gives you a boost. And it releases your sex hormones, which work really, really well in your system for keeping you young. It also keeps your vagina healthy to masturbate and lubricate. So these are all the benefits of it. So I would always talk about masturbation to all my clients, whatever their gender and whatever their relationship status. And I think women in particular, because we haven't had permission to masturbate, it is still considered shameful for a lot of women. I think there's a whole piece of work I often have to do with a woman for her to understand that she can have permission to understand herself sexually, and that if you understand yourself, you're going to be able to help others to understand what you enjoy better as well. So I think for women who are separated or widowed, there's a grieving process. It's okay. You don't have to be a sexual animal during those times. We go through phases of rest and honoring our loss, and we don't have to be everything all the time. So it's okay to have a fallow period, or a period of where we're just recovering. And I think all masturbation, and I know that word has negative connotations for a lot of people. So I would approach it for anyone as an experience of self-love. So first, because a lot of people can masturbate and hate themselves and punish themselves for masturbating, or feel guilty or ashamed for doing it, and they don't feel good about themselves. So the first thing is self-kindness, self-compassion, coming from a place of, I could do with feeling a little bit of love, a little bit of affection physically. I'm on my own at the moment. What feels good in my body? And this is where the sensual versus sexual is really useful. You just start with, I like that feels nice. Oh, what's it like to do? Okay. Oh, my neck. And so it doesn't have to have any sexual element. It can just have a pleasure element. And you're already in the realm of self-love then. Love doesn't have to equal sex, right? We know that. And nor does it when we're touching ourselves. So I think a lot of people remove any enjoyable, pleasurable, intimate, or sensual touch when they lose a relationship. And it's okay to do it for a while, but after a while, it's lovely to start seeing how you can reintroduce self-hugs, whatever it is, a bit of beautiful moisturizer after a shower, and taking a little bit of time to apply it rather than slapping it on in 30 seconds and you're off before you're dressed before it's soaked in. Just taking that little bit of time to care for ourselves, to value ourselves. And that to me is the gateway into then more sexual touch, if that's where we want to go. And you don't have to if you don't want to.
So with that, I know I have a couple points, and I know we're running out of time here. One thing I want to bring up before I ask you your closing thoughts. I read an interesting article in the New York Times when I was researching this. And it was, again, I don't like to put people in a collective either, because I don't know if I necessarily agree with the article. Well, actually I didn't, but
Okay.
it just said why Gen X women are having the best sex. And I'm thinking, what the heck? Because I'm a Gen X woman. I don't know. I know a lot of Gen X women good for her. I was like rallying her on, like, wow, but she was divorced and I guess re-exploring her life in her 40s. Maybe she felt trapped. Again, she's coming from a different circumstances. So I thought, put us all in a collective. But I do agree, as we get older, sometimes we have the mental capacity, but we don't have the equipment. Like, we don't have the users. We have the user's manual, but the equipment might be failing. When we're young, we've got the equipment. We don't have the user's manual. I just found that interesting. And because you touched on something before we wrap that we talked about in our private conversation, she was saying it's not the 50s the new 30. It's just that life's milestones are being moved around now. And you talked a little bit about striving. And in a nutshell, if you could just maybe talk about a little bit, maybe what your thoughts are about that headline, and just, are we a little more free, or do you see it getting better or worse when it comes to maybe living up to these expectations?
Well, for a start, Gen X women are in their middle life. Most women in their middle life who enjoy sex are having the best sex they've ever had, if they're enjoying it. Why? Mm-hmm. Mostly because they give less of a shit. You know, they don't care so much that they're baggy at the seams, that their boobs are tucked into their waists, that they haven't waxed. You know, they're more forgiving of themselves. Those who enjoy sex. Those who struggle, I think, might still be holding on to a lot of the pressures that are put on women at all ages and trying to be a lot of things with limited capacity and energy. So that's where striving or not striving can be a really useful thing to experiment with, if you're lucky enough to not have to strive, because most of us have to. But from learned experience and from watching and with my lived experience and seeing clients in this, sometimes the stuff we strive for isn't a necessity for life. So sometimes there are things that you can let go of that free up time and energy that you can spend on self-care in a different way, which might be more internal, might be more about physical well-being, not how you look, but might be more about self-love, might be more about taking that bath in the afternoon. But I do believe that there is a message more and more for women to strive right up to death in every area of their lives, and that's what success means. And I just have a different set of values around what success is. Therapist, I'm going to have a different set, I guess. And I'm not here to shame anybody. Everybody's entitled to do their lives how they want to, if it's working for you. But if you are burned out, in pain, worn out, fed up, don't know how to get through the next day, maybe you could strive a little less and maybe just learn who you are when you're not striving. Oh my, what a journey I went on for myself. Meeting yourself when you're not trying to be better in whatever field it is means you have to meet yourself as you are and figure out if you can like yourself just as you are. And I guess people would get different answers to that. It's the most important thing I ever did for myself. And I didn't do it on purpose. I'm not some big wise person. Ooh, today I shall learn how to not strive. I had nothing left to strive with. That's how I found out about it. But it was the best thing. So I invite people to check what's really going to keep food on the table and keep them safe and fed and okay, and what is extra that they might be able to let go of that might free them up a little bit more time. And the biggest thing is get off Instagram.
Amen. Yes. I feel like Gen X, we dodged many bullets when it came to social media. I feel like we say this all the time. Yeah. The dumb things we did, the lack of common sense, like we weren't broadcasted all over.
Oh, thank God I wasn't filmed. Oh my God. I don't know if I'd have survived if that was online.
Hell no. Hell no. The last thing we wanted was evidence for anybody, ourselves or anyone.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
So can you just share? Well, we definitely agree on that. One last final thought, just maybe something we didn't talk about today, and then how can people work with you before we wrap?
Well, guess what? I'm at the end of April going to take 6 months off to just not strive, because I really like not striving. Does that make me lazy? Maybe it does. But
who cares?
I really don't. I don't
think so.
So here's the thing. I love American people, generally speaking, of course, again, generalizing, but I just get on better generally. So I would love to work with American people. How do we do it? I don't know the answer. I would love to provide individual and couples and thruples and whatever else kind of therapy that American people might want to have with somebody like me. I don't know if Americans can get, I know they wouldn't get covered by their insurance or whatever to work with a therapist in Ireland. So that's a consideration. So that's one thing. And then there's the time difference, but it's manageable. I have an American supervisor, for example, in Chicago, and we manage fine. But I would say beyond that, I am planning on more workshops, maybe some retreats that would be for couples or for women, and that would be something that would be open to anybody. So I would say keep an eye on my website. I am really bad at, because I'm trying to come off social media because I can't manage with them. The owners of these platforms and their values just really, I'm not doing so well with giving them money and support. Now, that's just my thing. And so I don't do a lot on Instagram, but I am there. You can find me there. Empowers Me is my tag. Is that what it's called?
Yes.
And it's also my
handle.
website. But my website and LinkedIn would be the place where I will post any future workshops or retreats that I plan to do. Otherwise, if people wanted to contact me for therapy, get back to me in October. Sorry.
Okay. That's okay. What's your website? Could you just spell it out?
Empowers Me. So E for Emily, M for Mummy, Power, SME. So it's a little play on my initials. Empowersme.com. Very simple. And it's my tag for Facebook and Instagram as well.
You're just a treat. So this was just, maybe we'll have you on again in the future. That would be a lot of fun because I feel like there's a lot of things that we could have gone to, but for sake of time, that's it for today's episode of Second Opinion. A big, big thank you to Emily Powers Smith for sharing her expertise on sexuality, sensuality, and how we can embrace pleasure at every stage of life. I hope this episode has helped shed light on the challenges and opportunities that come with midlife intimacy and gave you some ideas on how to prioritize your own sexual well-being. If you've enjoyed today's conversation, don't forget to subscribe, rate, and leave a review. It helps others find the show. And if you have a topic you'd love for us to explore, please drop us a note. We're always looking for new ideas, so don't be shy. I'm Rosemarie Belts. Until next time, take care of yourself, get some rest, and remember, always get a second opinion.